Good evening and welcome to a belated start for this evening's edition of Resistance TV. We've had some major technical problems, which we can only apologise for. I'm having to speak to you through my telephone, and our guest, Tosh McDonald, he likewise. So the gremlins have really got to work this evening. So apologies for the late start, and it will therefore be a truncated episode. But tonight we're discussing the government's threat to workers' rights after the Financial Times recently reported that the Business Department, with the approval of Downing Street, were drawing up a package of deregulatory measures that would tear up a range of employment protections. These include the 48-hour limit on the working week, the statutory right to breaks at work, and it would also exclude overtime payments being included in holiday pay calculations. Now, we know that there are a good number of fanatical neoliberal free marketeers who are key figures now in the cabinet, including the business secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng. So this is obviously a real threat. And joining us to discuss how we should respond to these threats is the veteran trade unionist and a good comrade of mine, the former president of ASLEF, the Train Drivers Union, Tosh McDonald. And people may remember that Tosh and I toured the country in 2018 and 2019 campaigning for greater democracy in the Labour Party, including open selections for all Labour MPs. But I hope you can hear me okay, Tosh. But let's start off by just getting your response to this review that's taking place on employment protections. What do you think about it?
Their class, and they try and attack us in any way they can. So it's not surprising they're coming for us. I just want to make one point, if I can, before we start, Chris. It seems quite a coincidence. I've been doing loads of virtual meetings since the coronavirus pandemic started, and I've not had this problem with them. The day after the Labour Party employs a former Israeli spy, we start having problems. So I suppose we can imagine that the two things are unconnected, but you never know, perhaps. So
well, that wasn't lost on me either, Tosh, I've got to say, but yeah.
But yeah, I mean, what's important now is I don't think, the Tory party are going to come for us. They always do. It's in their nature. It's in their DNA. They represent their class. Now, some of our class actually think they have interests within Tory party. They don't. They'll come for us, all of us. It's our expense that they look after their backers and their wealthy supporters. And I think we can't rely at the moment on the Labour leadership to defend us in that. We've got to look towards ourselves and our own organisations, and that is the trade unions. And a point I want to make from the start is I'm proud ASLEF it's only a little union, but it's a very strong little union with 94% membership density, I think it is. It did have at the time I left. So 94% of all train drivers were in ASLEF. Now, we always manage the rights, workers' rights we've got now, whether they came through Europe or whether the ones introduced anyway. We were able, as a strong, united trade union, to get better than that anyway in many cases. Whether it be, we had 35-hour week, 4-day weeks, many things, and good remuneration packages in there, quality time off, and many, many other benefits that being a united, strong trade union, we were able to deliver. So we need to look to ourselves and look to the trade unions.
Yeah, I mean, we do need to look to the trade unions. I agree with that. But how geared up do you think the trade union movement is at the moment to resist these attacks? I mean, when Thatcher came to office in 1979, trade union membership was much higher than it is today. I think only about 23% of the workforce now are a member of a trade union. And in the private sector, it's only about 13.5%, the last figures I saw that the TUC published. So, and it's going to be the private sector workers that are going to be most vulnerable. So what do you think? How well placed are the trade union movement to respond to this challenge?
Well, obviously not as well placed as there would be if every trade union had 90-odd% membership density. But we haven't got that, and that's something that we need to do. But what we need to do is concentrate on building trade union membership, trade union density, and get people to join the unions. And by joining the unions, that's not treat it like a shop where you pay your money and expect everything to be done for you. But you have to join the trade union and be a trade unionist, be active in your trade union. And that gives us the strength, if we're in trade unions, to go forward. I mean, as you know, everyone who holds public office in the Labour Party, as you've done, as I do, until the May elections come, when I've refused to stand again under the current leadership, you have to be a member of a trade union. So what happens is we get some trade unions that will just give cards of convenience to people who want to stand as an MP or as a councillor or as a mayor. And we must, as a trade union movement, stop that practice. We don't just want somebody who's going to pay a few bob a month to get a card. We want somebody who's going to be a trade union, act like a trade union, follow trade union rules and principles. And I just think it's a sad state of affairs we've got when we can't rely on the Labour Party leadership. I mean, recently they have come out and made some statements for the Unite workers and also the GMB workers at British Gas. But look how they just totally ignored, in fact, didn't ignore, worked against the teaching unions during this pandemic. We need to build the trade union movement up, but we also need to build it up and not be frightened of the membership. We need to encourage people to join, but also to come to the branch meetings, come to the regional meetings and hold the union reps' feet to the fire.
Yeah, I mean, again, I mean, I certainly take your point on that. I mean, and you've been critical of the Labour leadership, but what about the TUC? I mean, what role do you think the TUC should be playing, and indeed has been playing? I mean, obviously the TUC, not entirely their fault, but they presided over a substantial reduction in trade union membership over the last 40 years or so. I mean, what do you think? What have you got to say about their role in all this?
Well, I think the TUC have got a lot to answer for, and they've got a lot to live up to. I mean, I remember growing up as a young adult. I remember when anything big was happening in the nation, in the country, you'd see on the news programmes, you'd see they would talk to whoever was leading the government at the time and whoever was in the opposition at the time. But then they would go to the TUC. It was almost an equal part. And that's not the case now. And yes, if we've had falling membership, we had all the attacks under the Thatcher years. Their whole objective was to try and destroy the trade union movement. We should be proud that they never managed that, and we are still here. But we've got a long way to go. And if we can encourage people to join the unions, wherever they work, in the public sector or in the private sector, join the trade unions. And remember, not all trade unions are affiliated to Labour Party. I think there's only 12 that is. But join the unions, become active, and let's put pressure on. Let's put pressure on. Let's make sure that they have to listen to the trade union leaders and not just the politicians.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, because obviously the rail unions have been very strong and have got quite good density in terms of the membership. I mean, what sort of things do you think the trade unions ought to be doing then to, reach out and encourage people to join them, to get involved?
I think representing the members and speaking up for the members at every occasion. I mean, there has been times in the past where sometimes trade unions haven't done the right thing. I remember in ASLEF, the flexible rostering dispute, where previous to that, the TUC had come out with a programme that any trade union falling foul of the new trade union legislation, then they would have the might of the trade union movement behind them. That never happened with ASLEF in the flexible rostering dispute. What happened was that I remember Len Murray came out and said, you better go back to work, lads. ASLEF did take all-out strike action in the end. They didn't give in. They tried the best, but without the trade union movement behind them, it never happened. We see, when we go back to the miners' strike of 84, 85, I don't think the trade union movement gave enough support. The rail unions, the RMT, NUR as it was then, and ASLEF, we gave support. I often say about in our area, during that year-long strike, there wasn't a shovel full of coal that moved by rail, but other people did move it by lorry and such. So the trade union movement has to come and stand fast, and it has to stand together. And that's going to be a difficult thing. I mean, I think part of ASLEF's strength is that we are all train drivers. Every officer, every full-time officer, every executive committee member, the general secretary, assistant general secretary, everyone is a train driver. All elected from within the grade, who know the job inside out, know the problems that people face, know what it's like working on social hours when most people would be playing with the kids at night. Train drivers would be going to bed and the wife or husband would be telling the kids to be quiet because your mum or your dad's got to get some sleep to get up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And understanding that. Now, there's been a move towards big unions, which are almost TUCs in themselves. And I don't think we're ever going to see that reverse. But maybe, and I don't want to tell the unions what to do, but maybe the way forward would be autonomous sections within those big unions, where people who do the same job would stand together, who know each other's conditions inside and out, would stand together. That's just my opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, when I left school, I mean, I'm a little bit older than you, Tosh, and I went initially into a factory, but then I ended up working in the building trade, and you know, it was the Union of Construction and Allied Trades and Technicians. I mean, and that was actually an amalgamation, because I mean, there used to be like a bricklayers union, a plasterers union, a painters union, a carpenters union, and they came together under UCAT, and obviously now, as you know, UCAT's been absorbed by Unite. But there has been, I mean, groups like new unions like the Independent Workers of Great Britain, and they've been quite successful in organising, migrant workers and zero-hour contract workers. I think a lot of their activity has been in London, but do you think there's any scope for new unions to emerge, smaller unions? I mean, like ASLEF, you said one of the strengths of ASLEF is that everybody's been a train driver, so they really know the industry, know what they're talking about, and have a real affinity, I think, with the struggles and the challenges and grievances, that members bring to the union. Do you think there's any scope for that, and is that something we should be encouraging to happen, do you think?
Well, of course there's scope for that, because these unions have come up and have taken successful action in some cases. And because there's scope for it, is because the traditional unions are maybe missing something. They're missing a deal. They're missing something that's there, and it's happening outside. I mean, I remember when people were taking to the streets, and the riots were taking place in London a few years ago. I was on the ASLEF executive at the time, and in London, a lot of young people, which we've been saying for years, young people aren't interested. They can't get them to do anything, and all of a sudden they were showing us the way. Maybe not everything was right, some of the looting and stuff that took place, but young people said enough's enough, we want to stand up. But there was no real leadership there, it wasn't ready, and that's what's happening with some of these new smaller unions. And I hope, hopefully one day these unions will become part of the official trade union movement and get in there and be embraced by them, because the only new unions only take up a space because it's left vacant, because the traditional unions aren't in there. And sometimes we'd congratulate ourselves too much on what we've achieved and what we're achieving, and perhaps we don't look elsewhere.
There's a real challenge, isn't there, Tosh, I think, though, in terms of organising workers now, because, the workplace has been atomised. And, as I've already said, a lot of people now on zero-hour contracts, many people forced into self-employment. I mean, enforced self-employment, not necessarily what they would wish to do. And it's how do we organise in those sort of workplaces and so on, where in the old days, where you had big factories, a lot of workers coming together, it was a lot easier. So there's a massive challenge, isn't there? And I know Unite, I've established Unite Community as one attempt to try and organise, people who aren't necessarily in a traditional workplace or not in a workplace at all. I mean, I don't know whether there's scope to do more in that direction. And should we be encouraging that sort of approach from other unions to, think outside the box? I think from what you alluded to, I guess you're saying yes, we should, but it's a question of how do we do that? How do we force the hand of the trade union leaderships to, go that extra mile?
Well, I think it's something that has to happen, because if people are out there and they're working, like you say, they're being forced into bogus self-employment, they're being forced into 0 hours contracts. And my grandfather, who brought me up, he saw the same thing, where it was just casual labour, it was 0 hours labour, but they used to go to pit or to docks or to factory gate to hope to be picked in the morning. So at least there they would get together if they're waiting to see if they're picked. Now they're all at home individually, are waiting for a text message to come through or something. Now, things have changed dramatically over the last few years, and the fact we're talking virtually now is plays testament to that. So we can use this new media, social media, to start talking to people like that. If they're on a 0 hours contract, they're waiting for the text message to come and say whether they've got a day's work. They've got access to social media, and we need to use that in a positive way and recruit. I mean, when we look at some of the things that's happening, it's we've made it possible. We've allowed it to become possible that people can be exploited in such a way, particularly young people. And I have a pet hate, and I talk about this as often as I can, and I'm so proud of my trade union, ASLEF, being what I can see the only one doing anything about it. When they did away with the default retirement age of 65 as it was at the time, and they said it was to do with age discrimination. Well, you know, there are two ends to age discrimination spectrum, and yet letting people continue working beyond the retirement age and such is one thing, but really that's just helping the bosses out. What we should have, what's happening at the younger end of the age spectrum, because people aren't leaving and going into a comfortable retirement with an occupational pension and enjoying the end of the life, the last part of the life in luxury and not having to worry about working, getting up in all weathers and all hours, enjoy a decent retirement like people did do, then people at the younger end, there's no jobs for them to move into. It also means that if there's nobody coming in at that end, there's nobody paying into the pension scheme for those who are already drawing them. So what it's happened is they've used the argument of age discrimination to get rid of default retirement age. And really what it means, bosses can encourage people to work till they die. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have people with no jobs to go to who can't find a job. So because they're desperate for work, they will then have to succumb to 0 hours contracts, to being rung up on a phone or text for a job, you know, and having to work in these awful situations. The people going around on little scooters in terrible conditions in all weather to deliver somebody's McDonald's or pizza up or something. That shouldn't be happening. We should be having people on a decent living. And I tell the tale of when we've managed in ASLEF to introduce what they call employee justified retirement ages. And we always use their retirement age, state pension age for that. We've done it in a number of companies. And you have to get the members to vote for this. And it's the employer who has to bring it in. So it takes strong negotiations. It means getting out and working with people. So we do that. And I remember one case, it was at a depot where we were trying to put the argument across. And we won the argument in the majority of cases. There was one guy who just wouldn't have it. He says, ASLEF's trying to steal my job. When he'd gone, people told me about him. He was 68 years of age. He was drawing his railway pension. He was drawing his state pension. And he was drawing a £60,000+ a year salary. Now that's a job thief. That's stealing a young person's job. And when people are doing that, so there's no jobs for the younger end coming in, that drives them into terrible employment. So by encouraging people getting a proper retirement age with a good occupational pension so you can retire. I don't want to see anybody forced into retirement poverty. But this is something that needs to do. And that's the kind of argument we can be having with young people, the kind of campaigns to get young people work by saying, look, we need a good pension for people who've been working. We need a default retirement age. So at least state pension age, they stop working, they start drawing the occupational pension, the state pension, and a job's created for somebody else. I mean, obviously in our industry as train drivers, it takes a long time to train somebody up. So actually help the employer to know there's a date when somebody will retire, so we can plan for that and recruit for it. Now, obviously, there's always unfortunate people medically fall by the wayside, so it comes up early, but that's all part of a recruitment plan. By trade unions like ASLEF getting a 4-day week in many places creates jobs for younger people coming in. For a 35-hour week creates more jobs for people to come into. These are things that the Labour manifesto had in them, and we're being told we couldn't afford it. We've done it. Yeah, we've done it. Yeah. It creates jobs. If you're creating jobs, if there are jobs there, then the people who want to work can't be exploited as much. And that's what I think trade unions need to do. They need to be getting out, talking to the unemployed, talking to young people. But it should be on the negotiating table of every trade union when they're going to negotiate with management. We should be creating jobs for people because that's better for us as a nation as well, better for the economy.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, look, as you know, Tosh, I'm working with others and we're trying to build a new movement, and we want to work with the trade unions. And I think one of the things, we've now got regional organisers in every region of the country. And one of the things that we could be doing is talking to people in communities about the sort of things that you've just been talking about. Because very often, a lot of people think some of those things that you've just mentioned are kind of pie in the sky. But that's because they've been fed a propaganda diet from the media that suggests that these things are unaffordable. But of course they're affordable. We're the 5th biggest economy in the world. We have our own sovereign currency. Money is no object. And let's remember what John Maynard Keynes said nearly 100 years ago. He said, by this time, in the early 21st century, we'll only be working 15 hours, never mind about 35 hours, 15-hour a week. That's what he was talking about. And you and I are a similar age. As I've said, you're a bit younger than me. But when I was growing up in the 1960s, and you might remember this, Tosh, we were being told to get ready for the leisure generation, because by the time of the 1990s, we were told we will only be working 15 or 20 hours a week. And so local authorities are having to build leisure centres and swimming pools and golf courses and tennis courts and all the rest of it to make sure that, you know, the leisure generation, this underemployed, as it were, generation would have activities and things to do. But that all went by the wayside when Thatcher came to power, and we had neoliberalism inflicted on us, and that enabled a small proportion of the population to get incredibly wealthy, while everybody else had their incomes stagnated or going backwards. And as you know, Tosh, we've got 14 million people living in poverty. So I'm hoping that our movement will be able to play a part. Activists on the ground, you know, encouraging people about the importance of being a member of a trade union. And if our predecessors, the people who blazed the trail for us, the likes of the toll puddle martyrs and the cooperative pioneers and all the rest of it, can achieve what they achieved with the challenges that they were confronting, then we should be able to do likewise. But one of the things, Tosh, I'd like to get your thoughts on is the impact of the anti-trade union legislation, though, and how that's going to impact on the ability of the trade union movement to resist this latest round of attacks on employment protections that Kwasi Kwarteng and Priti Patel and the rest of them are looking to potentially inflict upon workers. How do you think that's going to play?
Well, first of all, Chris, I think that every round of employment, anti-employment legislation, anti-trade union legislation that's come in, trade unions have had to be creative in how they operate and how they do things. And to be honest, trade unions have done a good job of that so far, the way we're able to operate under stricter and stricter regulation. But, you know, I think we're getting to that stage where we can't do that anymore. We've pushed the boundaries as far as we can. We've been as creative as we can. And at the end of the day, if we've got a government that's going to take away any right, any ability to organise, to protect each other, then we're going to have to look at other ways. And I have no problem with trade unions breaking the law. It's something that trade unions have done through their history. You know, there are occasions where trade unions have done it and not been fined for it or sequestrated. There's many times where they have been. But, you know, if it gets to the stage where you can't do anything legally anymore, then it's your duty to start taking things into your own hands. If a law's unjust, that law has to be challenged in every possible way. Now, an old comrade of mine who took me under his wing when I was first getting involved, a former full-time officer of ASLEF, a former ASLEF president, a guy called Bill Ronksley, he died the other year, 94, I think he was. And he used to tell me, Tosh, never underestimate how malleable them bastards are. And everything they do, they will shift. So because they're malleable, you can push them and push them and push them. And they will move, they will change. They're not this steel wall. They're not this brick wall that you can't move. You can move them. And an example of that is the manifestos of 17 and 19. How many things from their manifestos are these lousy, horrible Tory bastards having to introduce now because of the pandemic? You know, we couldn't afford broadband. Now we need broadband for everybody. Yeah. We couldn't afford to pay people extra money on the universal credit. Now we're having to pay people extra money on the universal credit. We're having to print money, if you like. You don't actually have to print money. But you're right what you say. Because we have our sovereign bank, we can do this. And I remember at the time when Ed Miliband was leader at Labour Party, I was involved with an organisation called Winning Labour. And the whole point of that was to try and get more working class people into Parliament. That's what it was about. It wasn't me. I was there saying why we should, as a trade union, saying why we should have more working class people in Parliament. We've got enough lawyers, you know, we've got enough teachers, we've got enough former barristers and stuff. We've got enough former advisors in Parliament. What we need is some people from shop floor, some people who work on the tools in there. And one people used to come round with us was an economist called Anne Pettifor, I think her name was. And I remember her saying I remember her saying, look, if you imagine the economy now is like a big hole, you can keep printing money and you can throw it in that hole and it's not going to cause inflation until that hole's full. Well, we've got a massive hole there now, massive hole, and it's nowhere near full. We can be doing this. We can be creating work for people. You know, the services that we used to provide. When we look at things like council housing, in a lot of cases, contractors come in to do the repairs that used to be done by directly employed labour, who all had good terms and conditions, good holiday rights. They were all represented by collective bargaining agreements in a union, and it's not there anymore. I was just reading in, I think it was yesterday's Morning Star, about the village up in Yorkshire that was with miners' houses. It were pit houses, and it's the government has insisted, even though the council said they've insisted that the place is going to be bulldozed to the ground. People without kicked out their houses where there is no council houses for them. There's lots we can be doing, and we need to do it. We need to grasp the nettle, if you like, get on with it. We've got to stand up and start to fight. But it's not for people like me and you, Chris. Like you said, we were being told in the 60s, at the time you get to my age, kid, you'll only be working a 3-day week. You'll only be working so many hours. You'll have loads of leisure time. That's great. But, you know, it's not happened because all the improvements, all the technological advances have been used to get more profit for bosses rather than everybody benefiting from it. But those like you and me of our generation, Chris, we were lucky enough to work in that time. I mean, I'm retired now. I retired when I got 40 years in my pension scheme because that leaves the way for a young guy to come in and get a job. But we've got that. There are people working now, Chris, generations of them who have no pension schemes. But generations of people who have just worked on casual labour all their life. We've got people who have not been able to build something up for future like that. I mean, I often talk about when I first left school, my first job I got was at a motorbike shop because I love motorbikes. I lasted 6 months because the pay were crap and the conditions were crap. Went to work in a factory. I got to be an apprentice welder, learnt to weld and use lathes and milling machines, which helps me build my own motorbikes now. Then I had 6 months on dole. So factory work weren't cut out for me. 6 months on dole. We got something called wage-related pay or earnings-related pay. Nikki's just shouting to me what it was because she worked in job centre. So my dole weren't much less than I were earning. And I've got to admit, I had only 6 months of my life where I were unemployed. And I used to get me gyro cash and go to the local pub. I had a fiddle with jukebox. I found out if I wedged a match in and sat next to it, when people put the money in, they got the record, but the money come out to reject thing. They got a new jukebox eventually and I had to get a job and went on to railway. You know, but things were there for us. We could do. If you fell by the way, if maybe you're just stressed out and can't work anymore for a while, you need some time off. There should be that safety net there to keep you so you're not forced into poverty because of it. You know, we had the chance, our generation. And you know, the saddest indictment I've got is I said to somebody recently, a young guy recently, I said, you know, I'd hate to be 21 again now. How sad is that? What does that say about our society? I'm 60 in a few days, and I would guess every other generation, people at 60, said, God, I wish I'm 21 again. It's not the case. I'm glad I'm not. And how sad is it?
Yeah, well, we've been going backwards, Tosh, and you know, you may remember when when we were on the Democracy Roadshow together, I used to say that we should become 21st century Luddites because all they wanted to do was ensure that the technology of the day worked in the interests of the many, not just for the few. I mean, they were just thrown into penury, and it's a similar sort of situation, maybe not quite as extreme as it was then, but it's the same sort of principle. And that article you mentioned in the Morning Star, where you talked about those, I think the former colliery houses, and about 70 or 80, I think they're going to be demolished to make way for executive homes. I mean, and the local authority rejected the application, and as you say, the government's overruled them. But no, it is a travesty. And I think one of the things which is very, very clear, listening to you speaking this evening and knowing your record, Tosh, and your involvement in the rail union, it just shows the strength and what can be achieved by a strong trade union. And I think hopefully if we can build our movement and work together with people like yourself and others, you know, there is hope for the future in my view. So before I bring Sean in, just as a kind of final question, as I say, it has to be a truncated edition this evening. I know you want to watch Man United on TV a bit later as well.
The real leader of the opposition, Marcus Rashford, will be playing, you see.
Yeah. Just say just tell us, Tosh, before I bring Sean in to get any audience reaction, are you optimistic or pessimistic about their future, the next 10 years?
It probably changes about 10 times a day, Chris. But basically, I am optimistic because when you look around, I see unity. I don't see it in the usual places right now, but I see unity in different places. When we look at this pandemic, the people who've come together to help people with the food banks and stuff, it's there. The feeling's right. I was light-hearted about Marcus Rashford a minute ago. What he's doing, he's been able to pressure Prime Minister when leader of opposition's been doing no. In fact, been supporting or at best abstaining against stuff. So all around there are things that are happening. When I see people helping each other on streets, when I see these community groups coming up, it's something. In fact, one community group we set up as local councillors, Nikki and I, we set up a community group, and people, it got hard to understand, get people to understand what we were telling them they could do. You know, councils have had money cut, but there are pots of money now being available that councils can't get, but these community groups can. And when I had to explain it to somebody, I'd say to him, look, if I was in your position and a councillor was coming to me and saying, set up this community group, you can take things into your own hands, you can draw down money and keep my feet at fire, you can make sure I'm doing stuff. If not, you can show me up for what I'm doing. Organise people, let them get together. I mean, I watched the inauguration today. And obviously, I think like you, I wanted Bernie Sanders to be the president of America now. We've got rid of Trump. That's obviously a major bonus. But everything he was talking about, Biden today, was about unity, about coming together. And, you know, I think this pandemic is sort of bringing people together. And I think as people suffer, and as the Tories come for more working conditions, come to get rid of your rights, that will bring people together, because I think we're in a state where unity is going to be the necessity for people to survive. And I think when you talk to your neighbours and stuff up and down the streets, people are going to be together. It won't be just one person in the street who can't make ends meet. It's going to be big swathes of your street that's not going to be able to make ends meet. And the trade unions have to step up to that. The politicians have to step up to that. But I've got to be quite clear. I can't see Labour winning another election, certainly under this period with this leader. All he's done is sown divisions. We had Corbyn elected, and I've never, even though some leaders that we've had in the past haven't been my choice, I never worked against the leader.
Me neither.
Look at what that parliamentary party in particular did to Jeremy Corbyn, the twice elected leader. They have destroyed the idea of unity within the party. They've destroyed the idea of collective responsibility. And some of them have even been rewarded with seats in House of Lords for it.
Yeah.
Now, so we will never unite behind this current leadership. So there will have to be a leadership challenge before we can move forward in Labour Party. Somebody we can all unite behind. If that doesn't happen, the Labour Party will be left high and dry, and people and movements will take place without them.
Well, movements happening already, outside the party. I mean, I was a member for 44 years, as you know, but when I was a member of Parliament, in that period when I got re-elected in 2017, I mean, from 2010 to 2015, the Parliamentary Labour Party was, it was a very consensual place, and people had differences. But I've never witnessed in my entire life a more toxic environment than the Parliamentary Labour Party. It was appalling. And you may have your differences, those on the right of the party with Jeremy Corbyn, but the level of disrespect was unbelievable. I mean, it was, heckling the guy and shouting him down, and me. I mean, in many ways, it's even worse. I mean, they would howl me down. I mean, it's just no respect, no mutual respect for differences of opinion. They were utterly ruthless, bully boy, disgusting tactics. And these people are not fit to be in Parliament. They're really not. I mean, we've got the wrong people. And you're right about bringing working class people in. That's desperately, desperately needed. I mean, we've got one class which is represented in Parliament, and they look after that class and the kind of the bourgeois class, as it were, the corporate class, the crony capitalist class. But look, we've only got about just less than 10 minutes left, because we're going to finish at 8 o'clock. Let me just bring Sean in and see what people have been saying about our discussion right now.
Good evening. Thanks, Tosh, for a really insightful discussion this evening. We've got loads of people asking questions. You've, you know, I think this discussion needs to continue on maybe in future weeks, because obviously there's a lot of people out there who are desperate, and they're also worried about the country and what direction we're going in at the moment. And so I'll just run a few questions by you. Wayne H says, how large is the deficit you're looking at regarding the trade unions?
The deficit, well, if we've only got, what figure did you give earlier, Chris, about how many people?
About 23% membership across the piece, and only 13% in the private sector. That's 23% membership across public and private sector, and 13.5% in the private sector. The rest are, so, you know, basically 87% are not unionised in the private sector.
That's the size of the deficit. But, you know,
right,
there's other kinds of deficits as well, isn't there? There's maybe in some cases a deficit in leadership. You know, we have to get out and campaign. Chris mentioned Unite earlier, and the Unite community. I think that's a great initiative. And other trade unions should be looking at other initiatives like that. And I don't think enough time spent recruiting people where there's no recognition. It's easier to do it where there's a recognition agreement, where you've got trade union agreements, where you've got the rights, you've got the infrastructure there for people to be represented. That's fairly easy. It's been easy for me all my life as 40 years as a trade union rep in an industry where we've had all the structure there ready for us. You know, to go into a greenfield site and try recruiting, I imagine that's much, much harder. But that's what there needs to be more doing. There needs to be more trade unions being active and getting out into greenfield sites where there are no trade unions at the minute.
Yeah, in fact, indeed, I finished last week's Resistance TV show with a bit of a rant about trade union organising, because I strongly believe, I've got a background in National Union of Teachers, trade union officer, and also I was on the TUC Northwest Committee, regional committee, and one of my big bugbears is the fact that they won't use their organisers to organise in communities. If they actually got their organisers out there into communities, then they might start winning a few people back in the workplace as well. But that's just one of my bugbears. Another question for you, from Amanda Sylvester. She asked that the trade unions need to come together. How do you propose we add fight to the TUC and the STUC?
Well, I certainly need trade unions and workers in general need to come together, and we need to start fighting on a single front together. But I do, as I made the point earlier, I think ASLEF as a craft union, just representing one grade of people, makes it a stronger union. So yes, we need to come together, but we still need them separate identities within the trade union movement, in my opinion. And I think, to be quite honest, the trade unions have got to start standing up, whether it's at the TUC or whether it's at the Labour Party. And as I say, the first thing to do is to stop trade unions giving cards of convenience to people just so they can be an MP or a councillor or a mayor. And the union can say, look, we've got so many, we've got X number of our members that are in Parliament, X number in Scottish Parliament. It's not about that. ASLEF hasn't got a member of Parliament. It's a few councillors dotted around the country, and it's not had a member of Parliament since the 1970s. But I think it's been a very influential union with the pressure it's been able to put to bear and campaigning amongst politicians. So we need to get the trade unions to act in one line, when the TUC should come out and support trade unions unequivocally when they're in struggle. So should any Labour politician, being it a national politician, a local council like myself. The first things out of your mouth when people in your area or anywhere else are in dispute, workers in dispute, the first word should be, I support the trade union. And the trade unions need to earn that support from people. So we need to get out there and do it. And we can.
Absolutely.
I would just add one thing to what
actually right. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I'll just add one thing to what Tosh has said as well, and put it back in a way to the person who asked the question, because I think a lot of this comes down to grassroots activity and democracy and democratising the trade unions and getting rank and file grassroots members to be putting pressure on their leadership to do the sort of things that, that Tosh has been outlining there, because unless we stick together, we are going to be screwed, and there's no doubt about that. I mean, we've got an ideologically driven government, the worst in my lifetime, is even worse than Thatcher, and unless they're met with collective force, then they're just going to ride roughshod through us.
Yeah, but unfortunately, in my experience, a lot of people are scared to join unions, and I think this comes down to all the negative propaganda, from the 70s and 80s. It's still with us, and it's still carrying on to the next generation and the next generation, and we need to find a way to eradicate that.
Well, one of the things I think, Sean, we should tell people about the 70s, they weren't perfect. You can look at them through rose-tinted spectacles. I grew up, as I've said, in the 60s. I left school in the 70s, and in the mid-1970s, inequality was at its lowest in this country. That was thanks to the efforts of the trade union movement. Let's be honest about it. And me, as an apprentice bricklayer, used to, Tosh would be bored of me telling this anecdote, but it's worth just repeating. A 19-year-old apprentice bricklayer, as I was, thanks to the efforts of the trade union movement, making sure that through collective bargaining agreements, workers got a proper remuneration, I was able to buy a brand new 3-bedroomed semi-detached house in a desirable village 8 miles south of Derby, backing onto a waterfront at 19 years of age. Now that is beyond the realms of possibility for 90% of the workforce today, even in relatively well-paid occupations. So that was possible in the 1970s. Let's just remember that and stress that, I think, when people talk about the 1970s in pejorative terms. There were problems with it, but there were a lot of real benefits as well from the 1970s.
It's all this propaganda, though, isn't it, that's spread through the media.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's just go. I'm going to just ask another quick question. Wayne asked this question quite a few times. When you said that we can create jobs, Tosh, Wayne was really interested in finding out how we can create those jobs and what can we do.
Well, like I said, the big example that I gave, and the quickest one, is to have decent retirement ages with a decent pension, so you're not forcing people to retire into poverty. So it creates jobs at the other end for people to come into. I also think when we look at the climate crisis that we're in now, there could be millions of jobs tackling the climate crisis. With renewable energy and stuff, there should be thousands upon thousands of jobs created there, and we should be embracing it. Whether it's better public transport, like from my industry, whether it's creating renewable energy out in the North Sea or wherever, there are lots of things, whether it's about insulating homes better, there's work there. But I do believe a big problem that's happened, it was the EU that introduced it, was this getting rid of default retirement age. It's basically getting people to work until they drop, not have any quality of life at the end. And it's stopping people at the younger end of the age spectrum getting into quality work.
So agree. I've been banging that drum for years as well, Tosh. I'd so agree with you on that one. Well, just as my last question, just to segue.
The last one, Sean, because we're out of time.
Oh, sorry about that. We'll have to have him.
Ask the question, though. We did start a bit late now.
Oh, okay then. So it was about Brexit and about. Let me just find it now. What can we do to stop Brexit from ripping up our terms and conditions, our working rights?
Well, I, for one, don't believe that the EU was so good for workers. And an example I give recently, we all talk about the example of what it did to the people of Greece. But if you look at 2008, when the financial crash took place, Romania was a new country in the EU then, and it couldn't manage. It went with its begging bowl to the EU. And the EU bailed it out, give it a big bailout, but the price they had to pay was far too high. For instance, public sector workers had to take a 40% pay cut. The legislation that forces people to work longer came from the EU. And at the end of the day, what we were able to beat that by being organised in our industry. And that is what will happen. We need to, whether we're in the EU or out the EU, the governments, the establishment are going to come to attack our terms, our conditions, our welfare, anything they can get to make more profits from themselves. So in or out of the EU doesn't matter. One thing I will say, we need to get together, trade unions, all activists get together and fight the cuts that this government wants to bring in. But you know, we're only fighting one government. We're not fighting 27 governments or whatever it is in the EU. To me, the EU is you get little Englanders, you get little Europeans. I don't agree with any of them. We should be internationalists. We should workers all over the world have more in common than bosses from any little groups. And sometimes bosses are the people who pretend to be looking after workers and they're not. So by standing together, standing up and fighting, whether it's against this horrible Tory government or whether it's against the EU, when they're trying to bring in things that damage us, we need to stand up and fight against them. That's my
On that note, Tosh, I'm going to have to draw it to a close. I know you were on a tight schedule, so thanks very much indeed for taking the time out to speak to us tonight. And a real apologies for the technical difficulties. We've had a truncated broadcast this evening, but I think it's been illuminating. And Tosh's final comment there is essentially workers of the world unite, and that's got to be a crucial message, I think, that we need to.
Chris, it's always a pleasure to share a platform with you, Chris, whether it's in real life or whether it's virtual. And I'll never forget when a brickie from Derby and a train driver from Donny decided all MPs should be reselected. There should be open selections. They had kittens, mate, didn't they? These professional politicians. They did, mate. Brickie from Derby and a train driver from Donny.
They did, and then they came for me. But no, but we're not cowed. We're not defeated, and we're fighting back, and we'll keep going. So thanks again, Tosh, for that. Thanks everybody for watching. Apologies once again, as I've said, for the technical difficulties. Next week we're going to be speaking to Colin Hampton about the impact of the COVID crisis and how that's impacting on unemployed and low-paid workers. So join us next week at 7 o'clock, same place, same time. Thanks for watching and good night.